Sometimes when God calls you, it won't come wrapped in clarity or comfort. It won't look like a carefully written plan with all the steps laid out in front of you. Instead, it shows up in whispers, in nudges, in the restless stirring of your spirit that says, there's more for you than this. And the hardest part about that moment is that it rarely makes sense at the beginning. You look around at where you are. You look at what you've survived and you think, surely not me. Surely God is asking somebody stronger, somebody smarter, somebody more prepared. But that's not how God operates. His calling doesn't wait for your RA summit, your bank account, or your self-confidence to line up. His calling collides with your life exactly where you are, often at the most inconvenient, unlikely, and uncomfortable time. When God called Moses, he was hiding on the backside of a desert, wrestling with shame over his past. When God called Gideon, he was hiding in fear, convinced he was the least qualified of his family. When God called Mary, she was just a young girl, not expecting to carry the weight of divinity in her womb. Over and over again, the pattern is the same. God interrupts ordinary moments with extraordinary purpose, and the invitation rarely feels logical. That's the beauty of it. It's not supposed to make sense to the natural mind because it's designed to awaken the supernatural faith in your spirit. Maybe you've been sitting in that tension where God is nudging you towards something you can't quite name. It feels bigger than you, scarier than you, and you keep asking for signs that will make it all add up. But here's the truth. Clarity is not God's first language. Faith is. And faith means moving even when you don't understand the full picture. If you wait until everything makes sense, you'll miss the divine timing of what he's trying to do through you. Sometimes the only explanation you'll have is the peace that comes with obedience, and that has to be enough. The danger is that we confuse God's call with our comfort. We expect his invitation to fit neatly into the life we've already built, but his calling rarely does. His calling is disruptive. It shakes up the plans you thought were solid. It requires you to stretch in ways you never imagined. And it demands that you surrender the security of what you know for the uncertainty of what you cannot see. That's why trust becomes the foundation. You cannot lean on your own understanding in this season. You have to lean into his presence, his promise, and his voice. And let me be real with you. Trusting God's calling will sometimes look like losing your grip on everything else. Friends may not understand why you're stepping out. Family may question your decisions. Even your own logic will try to talk you out of it. But what feels like loss in the natural is making room for gain in the spiritual. God's call always carries provision with it, even when it doesn't look like it in the moment. Think about Abraham called to leave everything familiar without knowing where he was going. He had to trust that every step away from what he knew was a step closer to what God promised. The same is true for you. The unknown isn't meant to paralyze you. It's meant to prove to you that God is guiding your every move. And when you walk with him, you discover that what didn't make sense in the beginning becomes the very testimony that others can lean on when their time comes. So don't dismiss the call because it feels confusing. Don't shrink back because you don't see the whole staircase. Trust that if God is calling you, he's already prepared the path. He's not looking for perfection. He's looking for surrender. He doesn't need you to have it all figured out. He just needs your yes. Because the truth is, the call will never make complete sense until you start walking in it. And when you do, you'll realize that what once felt impossible was the very thing you were created to carry all along. One of the greatest lies the enemy tries to plant in our hearts is the idea that our past has the power to cancel out God's purpose. We replay mistakes, we rehearse regrets, we sit in shame as though it's a life sentence, and we start believing that what we've done disqualifies us from what God wants to do through us. But here's the truth. Your past may explain you, but it does not define you. God's calling on your life was written before the failures ever showed up, before the heartbreaks, before the bad decisions, before the seasons that made you question your own worth. What you've walked through doesn't erase your purpose. It shapes you into the vessel God can use. Think about how many times people in scripture stood face to face with the weight of their own past. David was a shepherd boy who made catastrophic mistakes, yet he was still called a man after God's own heart. Paul persecuted Christians before he became the one to carry the gospel to nations. Peter denied Jesus 3 times and still became the rock on which the church was built. Their past didn't disqualify them. It positioned them for grace. The very areas where they were weak became the stages where God's strength was revealed. Maybe your story feels too messy. Maybe you've convinced yourself that God can't use someone with your kind of history. But I need you to hear me. Your scars are not evidence of disqualification. They're evidence of survival. They prove that what tried to break you couldn't keep you down. And that's exactly why God can trust you with more. The calling isn't given to the perfect, it's entrusted to the willing. And sometimes the most powerful testimony comes from the very thing you thought would take you out. What the enemy meant for shame, God flips into strategy. That broken relationship you thought ruined you, God can use it to birth wisdom and compassion in you. That season of addiction you thought would define you, God can transform it into a testimony that sets others free. That moment of failure you thought was the end, God uses it as the beginning of a new chapter where His grace shines brighter than your guilt. Don't let your past convince you that you've been counted out, because in God's kingdom, nothing is wasted. There's a reason why the call feels heavy after you've made mistakes. Because the enemy knows if you ever believe you're still chosen, you'll step into a boldness that terrifies him. That's why he keeps whispering that you're not enough, that you've gone too far, that it's too late. But here's the good news. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. He doesn't scroll through your history to decide your future. He spoke your destiny before your first breath, and not even your own decisions can undo what He already ordained. And maybe you're sitting here thinking, but you don't know what I've done. You're right, I don't. But God does. He saw it all, and He still said, I want you. He still placed that dream inside of you. He still whispers purpose over your life. He still sends reminders through people, through sermons, through moments that tug on your spirit and refuse to let you settle for less. That's not coincidence. That's confirmation. Confirmation that your story is still unfolding and your past is not the final chapter. When you finally accept that truth, shame loses its grip. You begin to realize that God's grace was never about ignoring your past. It was about redeeming it. He takes what you thought was broken beyond repair and reshapes it into something more beautiful than you could have imagined. And when people look at you, they won't see someone disqualified. They'll see someone who should have been disqualified, but is standing because of God's hand. That's the kind of testimony that changes lives. The kind of testimony that points people back to Him. So stop disqualifying yourself. Stop replaying the reel of your failures and acting as though God hasn't already seen it. If He called you, He already factored in your mistakes. He already knew the detours, the delays, the breakdowns, and He still chose you. Your past is not powerful enough to erase your purpose. And when you step into that truth, you'll discover that what you thought was the end was only the setup for the beginning of what God has been preparing all along. Obedience is one of those words that feels simple until God asks you to actually live it out. Because obedience doesn't always come with a map. It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes obedience feels like walking blindfolded, trusting that God is leading you somewhere good even though all you can see is the step right in front of you. That's the thing about obedience. It rarely reveals the whole picture at once. Instead, it unlocks the journey one door at a time, and each yes you give to God becomes the key that opens the next chapter of your purpose. We love the idea of destiny, but often we resist the discipline of obedience that gets us there. We want the finish line without running the laps. We want the breakthrough without enduring the process. But God builds destiny in pieces. He invites us to say yes in the small, in the quiet, in the unseen, before he ever exposes us to the platform or the promise. That little tug on your spirit to pray when you'd rather scroll, that nudge to forgive when holding a grudge feels easier, that prompting to give when you'd rather cling tight. Those are the places where obedience is tested. And when you choose yes, something shifts. It may not look like it in the moment, but in the unseen, God is aligning your life with divine timing and divine favor. Look at Abraham. God told him to leave his home, his family, everything familiar, and go to a land he didn't even know yet. Abraham didn't get an address, a brochure, or a timeline. All he had was a word from God. And his yes in that moment unlocked not just a blessing for himself, but a covenant that would affect generations. Imagine if Abraham had waited until he had all the details before he obeyed. Imagine if he had said, God, I need the whole plan first. He would have missed the timing of the promise. That's how obedience works. Sometimes it doesn't make sense until you look back and see the harvest that came from a seed of surrender. Your obedience is not just about you. There are people connected to your yes. Somebody's breakthrough is waiting on your willingness to trust God when it doesn't make sense. Somebody's healing, somebody's answered prayer. Somebody's encouragement is on the other side of you, obeying the voice of God in your life. That's why the enemy fights your obedience so hard, because he knows your yes carries ripple effects that extend far beyond your own life. The challenge is that obedience often costs something. It may cost you your comfort. It may cost you relationships that no longer align with where God is taking you. It may cost you opportunities that look good but aren't God. And in those moments, the question becomes, do you trust him enough to let go of what feels certain in order to hold on to what is eternal? Because every time you choose obedience, you're declaring, God, I trust your way more than mine. And let me be honest, it's not always glamorous. Sometimes obedience feels like silence. You obey and nothing happens right away. You pray and it seems like heaven is quiet. You step out and doors don't swing open instantly. But don't confuse delay with denial. God uses seasons of waiting to test the strength of your yes. Will you still obey when the results don't come quickly? Will you still say yes when it costs you more than you thought? That's when obedience matures. That's when your faith deepens, because obedience isn't about the outcome. It's about alignment. It's about keeping your heart, your choices, and your life in agreement with the one who called you. Every great move of God in scripture began with a yes. Noah built an ark with no rain in sight. Joshua marched around Jericho with nothing but a trumpet and a shout. Mary carried a child she couldn't explain. Each of them had a choice, and each of their yeses unlocked miracles that reshaped history. Don't underestimate the power of your obedience. What feels small today may be the very thing God uses to bring forth something greater tomorrow. So don't wait until you have the whole plan to obey. Don't wait until you feel ready or worthy. Start where you are, with the next yes in front of you, because the truth is, you'll never see the fullness of what God has for you until you trust him enough to move with what he's already spoken. Each yes builds on the one before it, and together they form the pathway to the promise. Faith is the currency of this journey, and without it, you will find yourself bankrupt before you even begin. When God calls you, he doesn't always hand you the resources, the connections, or the proof in advance. What he gives you instead is a word, a whisper, a stirring deep in your spirit that refuses to let you settle. And it's in that moment where faith has to rise. Because faith is what allows you to trade what you see for what you believe. It is the exchange that says, I may not understand it, I may not see it yet, but I trust that God is who he says he is, and he will do what he promised. A faith doesn't always feel glamorous. It doesn't always look like standing on a stage or having everything together. More often, faith looks like trembling knees but still taking the step. It looks like believing for provision when your bank account is empty. It looks like showing up to the assignment when you don't feel qualified. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move in spite of it because you trust that God is greater than what intimidates you. The thing about faith is that it often asks you to risk your logic. Logic says, stay where it's safe. Don't rock the boat. Don't take chances. But faith says, step out. Trust that even if you don't know where your foot will land, God is already there to catch you. When Peter stepped out of the boat and walked on water, it defied every rule of nature. The only reason he could do it was because faith anchored him where logic could not. And though he sank for a moment, it didn't change the fact that he experienced the impossible simply because he trusted the voice that called him. Your calling will always demand faith, because God refuses to let you think you can fulfill it on your own strength. If it was small enough to handle with your resources, your talent, or your connections, you wouldn't need him. That's why his assignments stretch you. That's why his promises often feel too big for you, because he wants you to remember that this isn't about what you can do. It's about what he can do through you. Faith is the bridge between your weakness and his strength, your lack and his abundance, your impossibility and his miracle. But let's be honest, faith is tested in the waiting. It's one thing to believe when things are moving quickly. But what about when you've prayed and nothing seems to shift? What about when the doors stay closed? When the healing doesn't happen instantly? When the dream looks delayed? That's where faith deepens. Faith is not proven in the moments of instant gratification. It's proven in the seasons of delay. It's when you still choose to worship even though the promise hasn't shown up. It's when you keep showing up to the vision even though the results aren't visible yet. Faith says, I'm not moved by what I see. I'm moved by what he said. And faith has a way of multiplying when you act on it. Every time you take a step, no matter how small, it strengthens your trust for the next one. Think about David. He didn't start by slaying Goliath. His faith was built in the fields with lions and bears, victories that no one else saw. Those hidden moments of faith prepared him for the visible moment of destiny. That's how it works for you too. Your private yes, your quiet faith in the unseen is what prepares you for the visible manifestation of what God has promised. Here's the beauty of faith. It not only changes how you see your journey, it changes how others see theirs. When people watch you trust God through storms, through setbacks, through moments that should have broken you, your faith becomes a testimony. It gives someone else the courage to believe again, to hope again, to step out when they were ready to give up. Faith is contagious, and your willingness to walk by it plants seeds in the lives of those watching you. So if you've been wrestling with doubt, if you've been waiting for proof before you move, let this be your reminder. Faith doesn't wait for evidence. Faith is the evidence. It is the conviction that what God has spoken will come to pass, even if everything around you says otherwise. It is the choice to believe that God's word is truer than your circumstances. Faith is not just an idea. It is the lifeline of your calling. Without it, you will stall. With it, you will soar. And that is why faith must remain your currency for the journey ahead. Every calling comes with resistance. You can't say yes to God and expect the road to be smooth, because the moment you step into purpose, you step into warfare. The weight of your calling will stir doubt in your mind, opposition from others, and even loneliness in your journey. But the truth is, resistance is not a sign that you've missed God. It's often the confirmation that you're exactly where he wants you to be. And the good news is this: while resistance is guaranteed, so is grace. Grace is what keeps you steady when the storm tries to break you. Grace is what lifts you when the criticism cuts deep. Grace is what whispers peace when fear tries to suffocate you. Without grace, you'll wear yourself out trying to carry a calling that feels too heavy. But when you lean into God's grace, you realize that it's not your strength keeping you afloat, it's his. The resistance may not disappear, but grace will teach you how to rise above it. There will be seasons when people don't understand the vision God placed in your heart. They may question your decisions, distance themselves, or even mock your obedience. That's when grace steps in and reminds you that their acceptance is not required for your assignment. Grace shifts your focus from seeking approval to walking in alignment. You don't need everyone to believe in you when the one who called you has already gone before you. Resistance also shows up in the form of internal battles. Self-doubt will creep in. Fear will whisper that you're not enough. Your past will try to shout louder than your future. And on those days when your confidence feels fragile, grace becomes your anchor. Grace reminds you that you're not standing in your own perfection. You're standing in God's power. Every time the enemy reminds you of your weakness, you can remind him of God's strength that shows up in the middle of it. Think about Paul, who carried a thorn in his flesh, something that made him feel limited. He begged God to remove it, but God said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That means the very places you feel inadequate are the same places God's glory can shine the brightest. The resistance you're facing is not meant to defeat you. It's meant to reveal the depth of God's grace operating through you. Sometimes the resistance comes from the timing of God. You pray, you prepare, you obey, but the doors don't open when you expect them to. That waiting season can feel like resistance too, but grace covers that as well. Grace teaches you patience. Grace teaches you how to trust that God's delay is not his denial. Grace strengthens you so that when the right door opens, you'll be ready to walk through it with wisdom and resilience. The enemy wants you to confuse resistance with rejection. He wants you to believe that the obstacles mean you're unqualified. But the truth is, every calling comes with pressure, and that pressure is shaping you, stretching you, and preparing you for greater. Diamonds don't form without pressure. Oil doesn't flow without crushing. Glory doesn't reveal itself without sacrifice. And it's grace that ensures you survive the pressing without breaking. If you've been feeling the weight of resistance lately, I want you to shift your perspective. Don't see it as a sign that you're failing. See it as evidence that you're dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. The resistance is proof that you're carrying something powerful. And every time you lean into grace, you rob the enemy of his plan to wear you out. You rise stronger. You rise wiser. You rise more anchored in the God who never leaves you. So yes, resistance will come, but grace will meet it every time. Grace will carry you through seasons you thought would crush you. Grace will remind you that you are never walking alone. Grace will take the weight that was supposed to break you and turn it into the very thing that builds you. When God places a calling on your life, it's easy to think it's just about you, your breakthrough, your elevation, your healing, your success. But the truth is, your calling is bigger than you. What God is doing in your life is not meant to stop with you. It's meant to flow through you. Your obedience, your growth, your transformation becomes the seed that produces fruit for others. That's why the weight feels heavy sometimes. It's because you're carrying more than just your own destiny. You're carrying answers to prayers you may never hear and solutions to problems you may never see. Think about Joseph. He endured betrayal, slavery, and prison, and at any point he could have assumed his story was only about his suffering. But when the time came, he realized that everything he went through positioned him to save not just himself, but an entire nation. His calling wasn't about his comfort. It was about the lives that depended on his faithfulness. That's how God works. He will take the very thing that almost broke you and turn it into the very thing someone else needs to survive. Sometimes you don't see how big your calling is because it's wrapped in small acts of obedience. It's the prayer you pray for a friend who doesn't have the strength to pray for themselves. It's the word of encouragement you give a stranger that reminds them not to quit. It's the faith you hold on to in the middle of your storm that inspires someone else to believe in the middle of theirs. You may not realize it in the moment, but those small yeses ripple out further than you can imagine. That's why it's so important not to shrink back when the journey feels overwhelming. Because every time you keep moving, you create space for someone else to find their way. Someone is watching how you handle the weight of your calling. Someone is drawing strength from your survival. Someone is learning how to trust God because they see you trusting Him. Your life is a living testimony. And whether you know it or not, God is using it to impact far more people than you can count. The enemy will try to convince you that your life doesn't matter, that your story is too small, that your impact is insignificant. But that's a lie. He knows the truth, that if you ever embrace how much bigger your calling really is, you'll walk with a confidence that shifts atmospheres. You'll stop living just for yourself and start living for legacy. You'll realize that every hardship you overcame, every battle you fought, every tear you cried has purpose beyond your own healing. It was never just about you. It was about the ones who would come after you. And maybe that's why the cost feels high. Maybe that's why the sacrifice is cut deep. Because when God trusts you with a calling, He's trusting you with influence. Not influence for fame or applause, but influence for transformation. He knows your life can carry weight for others, that your scars can speak life into someone else's wounds. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to be used. Your calling is a bridge. It connects your obedience to someone else's breakthrough. It connects your story to someone else's hope. And when you finally see it that way, you stop asking, why me? And you start asking, who else? Who else can be lifted because I said yes? Who else can find healing because I refuse to quit? Who else can discover their worth because I chose to stand? That's when purpose becomes powerful, when it stops being about personal gain and starts being about collective impact. You may never fully see the lives your calling touches. Some of the fruit of your obedience may not even bloom until long after you're gone. But that doesn't make it any less real. Seeds planted in faith never die. They live on in generations, in families, in communities, in nations. And all of it starts with one choice to trust that your calling is bigger than you and to live like somebody else's future depends on it.